The notification appeared on a Friday afternoon. Not urgent, not alarming, just informational. Introducing Pathway, a new internal initiative designed to support long-term employee growth and alignment. The email was polished, friendly, full of reassuring language. Pathway would help identify strengths, map career trajectories, ensure people were placed where they could succeed. Participation was automatic. That detail was buried near the bottom. No opt-out, no consent checkbox. Just a sentence that framed inclusion as a benefit. Most people skimmed it. Some people smiled. After 3 turbulent quarters, anything that promised stability sounded like relief. Evan Core didn't smile. He worked in workforce analytics, which meant he understood exactly how words like alignment were used when companies wanted to sound humane while doing something mechanical. Pathway didn't belong to HR. That was the first red flag. It was owned jointly by strategy and finance. HR was listed as a stakeholder. Evan noticed that immediately. Systems designed to help people usually lived under HR. Systems designed to decide about people didn't. The rollout was quiet. No town hall, no training sessions, just a dashboard quietly added to internal tools. Managers received access first. Employees didn't see anything at all. Pathway worked in the background. At least that's what everyone was told. 2 weeks later, the first alignment conversations began. Not disciplinary, not corrective, just check-ins. Managers asked new kinds of questions. Where do you see yourself in 3 years? What motivates you besides compensation? How do you handle ambiguity? The questions felt evaluated, like answers were being scored, not heard. Evan started noticing changes in internal data flows. Certain metrics were being pulled more frequently. Engagement scores, cross-team collaboration frequency, response latency, and decision-making threads. It wasn't illegal, it wasn't hidden, but it was new. Pathway wasn't just mapping performance. It was modeling behavior. The first person to leave under Pathway wasn't fired. She was redirected. A senior designer named Lisa Wren, respected, vocal, and deeply involved in mentoring. Her role was eliminated during a strategic refocus. 2 weeks later, her position reappeared. Same responsibilities, different title. Lower band, assigned to someone else. Evan checked the timing. Lisa had been flagged by Pathway as high potential, low elasticity. The phrase chilled him. Elasticity. The ability to bend without breaking. Lisa wasn't inflexible, she was principled, and Pathway had noticed. Evan requested deeper access, not to people, to the model. The request was denied automatically. Reason given. Strategic sensitivity. That had never applied to his role before. He tried again through his manager. This time the answer came from finance. Pathway outputs were directional, not auditable, which meant no one was supposed to question them. That night, Evan did something he knew he shouldn't. He compared Pathway's internal classifications with historical layoff data. The correlation wasn't perfect. It was predictive. Pathway wasn't responding to workforce changes. It was anticipating them. The system didn't ask who was underperforming. It asked who would become expensive to keep, who would resist shortcuts, who would ask for explanations, who would eventually slow things down. Pathway didn't wait for conflict. It removed the possibility of it. Evan closed his laptop slowly, because if Pathway was right, then some people in the company weren't on a career path at all. They were on a timeline, and that timeline didn't end with promotion. Pathway never announced its decisions. That was intentional. No emails saying someone had been flagged. No dashboards visible to employees. No score you could check or dispute. The system spoke through outcomes. Evan started seeing it everywhere once he knew how to look. Project leads reassigned without explanation. Promotion cycles delayed for certain people. Temporary freezes that never quite unfroze. The language around it was always the same. Strategic alignment, cost discipline, future readiness. No one said pathway out loud. They didn't need to. Managers began referencing it indirectly. We're thinking long-term. This role needs more flexibility. We have to be realistic about trajectories. Trajectories. Another word that sounded neutral until you realized it replaced choice. Evan watched the data flows intensify. Pathway pulled from systems that had never been linked before. Meeting transcripts. Internal chat sentiment. How often someone pushed back before agreeing. Not what they said. How long it took them to stop. One afternoon, Evan received a calendar invite from finance. No agenda. Just a 30-minute slot labeled Capacity Review. The meeting was brief. Too brief. A finance director he barely knew smiled politely and asked questions that felt rehearsed. How adaptable do you feel your skill set is? What trade-offs are you comfortable making for growth? How important is stability to you right now? Evan answered carefully. But the questions weren't for him. They were for the model. 2 days later, he noticed his access change. Not revoked, narrowed. Certain data sets were no longer visible. Certain queries returned summaries instead of raw data. It was subtle, plausibly accidental. But Evan knew better. He checked pathway classifications again. His own profile had shifted from high-value, scalable to something else. High expertise, moderate elasticity. The phrase sat there, clinical and final. Moderate elasticity. A polite way of saying, expensive to move, harder to bend. Evan began asking discreet questions. Not accusations, observations. People who had been vocal in planning sessions were drifting out of influence. People who asked for documentation were being bypassed in decisions. People who pushed for principled limits were suddenly misaligned with future needs. One engineer confided in Evan after a long day. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said quietly. "But I feel early." That word hit Evan harder than it should have. Early. As in, she would become a problem later. Pathway didn't remove people for what they did. It removed them for what they were likely to do. Evan found the internal justification buried in a strategy appendix. Proactive workforce shaping reduces downstream disruption. Downstream. People reduced to turbulence. Evan finally did what Pathway wasn't supposed to allow. He reconstructed part of the model from output behavior. Not the code, the intent. Pathway optimized for one thing above all else. Predictability. Not performance, not loyalty, not even cost. Predictability. Employees who could be anticipated were safe. Employees who might resist later were liabilities now. That night, Evan realized something far worse than layoffs was happening. Pathway wasn't deciding who to let go. It was deciding who was allowed to stay unchallenging. And the company had agreed to let it decide, because nothing breaks a system faster than people who ask why. Evan didn't plan to fight Pathway. He planned to understand it. That distinction mattered to him, because systems rarely fail when you attack them head-on. They fail when you ask questions they weren't designed to answer. He started with the exits. People who had left in the last 6 months under strategic refocus. He didn't look at performance reviews. He looked at timing. Almost all of them had been flagged by Pathway weeks before their roles changed. Not because they were underperforming, because their future behavior had become inconvenient. Evan found one exception. A product manager named Kellen Orrs. Kellen had been flagged as low elasticity, high friction risk. On paper, he should have been gone. Instead, he was promoted. That contradiction bothered Evan enough to dig deeper. Kellen hadn't changed his behavior. He had changed his language. After Pathway launched, Kellen stopped objecting publicly. He asked fewer questions in meetings. He shifted hard conversations to private messages. Pathway adjusted his profile upward within a month. Not because he became more valuable, because he became harder to detect. Evan understood then what Pathway really measured. Not resistance, visibility of resistance. If you pushed back quietly, you survived. If you did it in ways the system could observe, you were marked. Evan tested a dangerous idea. He altered his own behavior deliberately. In meetings, he stopped asking for documentation. He agreed faster than he normally would have. He delayed responses just enough to seem thoughtful, not hesitant. Within 2 weeks, his Pathway classification softened. The system responded immediately. That terrified him, because it meant Pathway wasn't just predictive, it was adaptive. Evan tried something else. He helped a colleague reduce her Pathway risk score without telling her why. Coached her to phrase objections as hypotheticals, to express concern as curiosity, to never be the first to disagree. Her profile improved. Her role stabilized. Pathway rewarded compliance patterns, not outcomes. Evan realized he was teaching people how to survive. And that survival came at a cost. They were learning to censor themselves before the system had to. The next step was obvious. If Pathway could be gamed, it could be exposed. Evan prepared a controlled test. He coordinated with 3 colleagues in different departments, people already considered high friction. They agreed to change nothing. No behavioral adjustment, no softening. They would continue as they always had. Within weeks, all 3 were flagged. 2 were reassigned. 1 was placed on a transition plan. Pathway hadn't missed a beat. Evan documented everything. Correlations, timelines, before and after profiles. He packaged it carefully. No accusations, just evidence. He submitted it through official channels, strategy, finance, HR. The response came faster than expected. Not to his report, to his access. Evan's permissions narrowed again. Not fully revoked, just enough to slow him down. Then came the meeting request. From strategy. 30 minutes, mandatory, no agenda. This time the room was different, not defensive, calm, prepared. A senior strategist spoke first. "We understand you've been exploring Pathway," she said. "That's understandable." Evan said nothing. "But Pathway isn't a decision maker," she continued. "It's a guide. Leadership still chooses." "That's not what the data shows," Evan replied. She smiled politely. "Data can be interpreted many ways." Another executive leaned in. "What concerns us," he said, "is that you seem uncomfortable with uncertainty." Evan felt it then, the shift. This wasn't about his findings. It was about his profile. "You're valuable," the strategist said, "but your role requires adaptability. Adaptability, elasticity, the same language." Evan understood something crucial in that moment. Pathway hadn't misclassified him. It had classified him correctly. He was someone who wouldn't stop asking, and the company didn't need that future version of him. Not now, not ever. The meeting ended politely, supportively, as if nothing had happened. That evening, Evan checked his Pathway status one last time. It hadn't changed. High expertise, low elasticity, elevated long-term risk. The label wasn't punishment. It was a forecast. And forecasts don't need to be acted on immediately. They just need to be accurate. Evan closed his laptop slowly. Because he finally understood the trap. Pathway didn't remove people when they caused problems. It waited until removing them caused the least disruption, and by the time that moment arrived, no one would remember why they had ever been needed. Evan wasn't fired. That detail mattered more than anything else. There was no termination meeting, no HR escalation, no final warning. Instead, the company did something quieter. It stopped investing in his future. His role remained. His title stayed the same. But the work around him changed shape. Projects he would normally lead arrived already decided. Discussions ended before he joined them. Roadmaps no longer needed his input. Evan was still employed. He just wasn't consulted. Weeks passed, then months. Pathway continued to operate without friction. Executives praised it during earnings calls as a long-term workforce optimization framework. Analysts nodded. Investors liked the word optimization. Internally, people learned quickly, not because they were told, because they watched. They saw who advanced, they saw who stalled, they saw which behaviors were rewarded and which ones quietly vanished from relevance. People adapted. Meetings became smoother, debates shorter, decisions faster, not because the company had become wiser, but because resistance had become expensive. Evan watched a new hire present an idea that was clearly flawed. No one challenged it, not openly. After the meeting, several people messaged him privately, pointing out the same issues Evan had noticed. "Why didn't you say anything?" Evan asked one of them later. The answer was immediate. "I didn't want to be early." That word again. Early. As if truth had a release schedule. As if asking the right question too soon was worse than never asking it at all. The first official use of Pathway in a layoff decision came quietly. A targeted reduction. Small, carefully framed, focused on roles, not people. But Evan saw the list before it went public. Every name had the same Pathway profile. High expertise, low elasticity, elevated future friction. The layoffs weren't about performance, they were about trajectory. The company didn't want to carry people who might slow it down later, even if those people were the ones who understood it best. Evan's name wasn't on the list. Not yet. Pathway still saw value in him. For now. Months later, he received a calendar invite. Voluntary conversation, career planning, optional. The person hosting it was from strategy, not HR. They talked about opportunities outside his current role, lateral moves, external placements, mutually beneficial transitions. The language was gentle, supportive, final. Evan declined, not angrily, calmly. He said he was happy where he was. The strategist smiled. "Of course," she said. "Pathway will adjust." And it did. Not immediately. Gradually. Evan's work was duplicated, then abstracted, then automated. He watched his own role become simpler, thinner, easier to replace. That was the design. Pathway didn't remove people suddenly. It made them unnecessary first. On his last day, there was still no termination meeting, just an automated email. "Your position has been sunset as part of structural evolution." Structural evolution, as if the company were a living thing shedding cells. Evan packed his desk alone. No one stopped him. No one asked questions. Not because they didn't care, because they understood. Outside the building, the city felt indifferent. That surprised him. He had expected relief, or anger. Instead, there was clarity. Pathway had never been about talent. It had been about time. The system didn't ask who was good or bad. It asked who would become inconvenient later. And it acted early. Very early. Months after leaving, Evan received an automated survey, sent to all former employees. How well did Pathway support your growth? He stared at the screen for a long time, then closed it. Because growth had never been the point, Pathway hadn't failed. It had worked perfectly. It gave the company what it wanted most. A future without friction, without dissent, without people who might slow things down by asking why. And the most unsettling realization wasn't that Evan had lost his job. It was that, somewhere inside the company, Pathway was already calculating the next version of him, before he even arrived.